Greetings, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Wait for a few more attendees to arrive. Okay, let's get started. Once again, greetings. It's wonderful to have you here with us. We're delighted to have you join us for today's webinar, Multilingualism, Workplace Superpower. I'm your host, Ned Buffin, Demand Generation Specialist at Cricket eLearning. At Cricket eLearning, we specialize in customized training in 10 languages, catering to companies, schools and libraries, adults, and youth. A bit of housekeeping for today's session. The question and answer box will remain open throughout the webinar. Today's webinar is organized into 2 segments, and we'll respond to questions at the completion of each segment. And a reminder that attendees can enable captions. Our panelists today will be Carrie Fischer and Dr. Xiomara Rivera Pagan. Carrie Fischer is the Globalization Services Manager at Subway, headquartered in Shelton, Connecticut. Carrie is responsible for all globalization-related strategies for the company. She has over 30 years of localization experience and has held previous localization positions at bodybuilding.com, Hyperion Oracle, and Transparent Language. She serves on 3 nonprofit boards, Women in Localization, Language Connects Foundation, and her neighborhood HOA. She's a mentor through MentorEase, Women in Localization's mentorship platform, and Carrie has a degree in French from Northern Illinois University. Dr. Xiomara Rivera Pagan has over a decade of experience with language learners and multilingual environments. She's held leadership positions, pioneered language programs, and advocated for language learning programs locally, nationally, and internationally. In addition to having worked in the school system, Dr. Rivera Pagan serves on the board of directors with Cultura Planera and The Third. Dr. Rivera Pagan co-founded the nonprofit Cultura Planera, committed to creating community spaces in which families and individuals can learn, participate in, and promote the traditional Puerto Rican musical styles of bamba and plena. Now I'd like to provide you a brief overview of the content we'll cover today. In segment 1, Carrie Fischer will first discuss the role multilingualism played in her career development. She'll describe how she was introduced to language learning, her first professional experience working with languages, and her introduction to the localization sector. Next, Carrie will explore the importance of multilingualism in the localization sector. She will provide an overview of the localization ecosystem, including different jobs available in the sector, before focusing on the role of multilingualism. In segment 2, Dr. Rivera Pagan will explore whether multilingualism provides economic benefits and if it furnishes cognitive benefits that are assets in the workplace. She will then discuss the influence of language training on workplace dynamics before focusing on the shortage of multilingual workers and its impact. U.S. Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel A. Cardona, has gone on the record expressing a very favorable opinion about the benefits of being bilingual or multilingual. At the Being Bilingual is a Superpower initiative launch event on November 16 of last year, he stated, "I know you believe deeply as I do that being bilingual is a superpower. It's an economic superpower, and multilingualism is also a cognitive superpower. Today, one of the outcomes we've defined for this webinar is that you will be able to more comprehensively assess Secretary Cardona's statement that bilingual is an economic and cognitive superpower. We also hope that this webinar will enable you to understand the importance of being multilingual for succeeding in international careers, particularly within the localization sector, learn how language training impacts workplace dynamics, understand the shortage of multilingual workers and its impact, and form an opinion on whether multilingualism is a workplace superpower. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest panelist, Carrie Fischer. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Ned. Really appreciate the introductions. And hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you. I decided to wear the same necklace that I did in my professional shot, but not the same shirt. So gotta mix it up a little bit. So the introduction, I'd like to talk about the localization industry, which is what I've been in for the last 30 years. You know, what is it? It's what I do for Subway, very simply, is I make sure that the content we produce, whether it be the app, the website, the ops manual for franchisees, all of that content is translated with a quality that is acceptable and, works in every target market that we're in. We're the largest quick serve restaurant, fast food chain, if you will, in the world. We have 37,000 restaurants worldwide in over 100 countries. You can imagine we have to get it right in all of these different countries to ensure that our guests get the best service, get the best food, and we want them to have a good experience overall. So that's what I do for Subway, and that's what I've done for my previous companies as well. I ensure that the content that we get is translated professionally, good quality, to make sure our customers are getting what they need, period. So I am a buyer of these language services, but the industry is made up of buyers like me. There's a bunch of people what I do at Yahoo and Google and Gap, and I know them. And then there's the sellers. So I buy my services, obviously, from sellers of language services. That could be in the form of a company that does this, or I also employ 7 individual linguists who really understand the Subwayisms, if you will, and can ensure that our fun, language and content is translated correctly into the target languages that we have. So how I use my global language skills every day. So yes, I have a degree in French, but I also have 4 years of Spanish under my belt and 2 years of Russian. So having this combination of languages really helps me do my job. You think I just, push projects to linguists or, to companies to get our stuff done, and that's just not the case. For example, our mobile app, we translated, believe it or not, the first language we translated into was Finnish. And that's because they're a 100% digital country. They don't want to go into a restaurant, believe it or not. They want to order ahead. They want to get their rewards, get their sandwich, and get out. And that's fine. So the rewards program that we came up with last year was called Subway MVP Rewards. That works great in America because we're referencing the most valuable player, right? If you've seen any of our ads in the States, it's all around sports figures and tennis players, basketball players, football players, you name it. So that's why the MVP really works here in the States. It doesn't work so well in Canada, and forget about Quebec. So MVP, we had to really, between me, my linguist in Montreal, the team in Quebec, and even a firm, to help us make sure it was going to sound okay or sound good in Quebec, we came up with les récompenses étoiles, star rewards. So that worked. And then the level of rewards also changed a little bit. Pro and captain, I think, stayed the same, but boss became legend. So that type of thing happens every day here at Subway, and it's what keeps me interested in what I'm doing. The second project that was very recent was I never know what kind of project I'm going to get on any given day. It can be so different. One day I got a big Word doc that had English, Spanish, and Portuguese in it. And I was told, we need the English content translated into Spanish and Portuguese. I need the Spanish content translated into English and Portuguese, and the Portuguese content translated into English and Spanish. Well, thank God I know Spanish. And I could tell the difference between Spanish and Portuguese. So I was able to do that. I'm able to isolate certain pieces of content in the original language and then get it translated into the target languages. If I didn't have those language skills, I wouldn't be able to do my job. So talking about localization, the localization sector and the importance of multilingualism. I wouldn't be in localization if I didn't have language exposure in high school. It was a required course. You had to have at least 2 years of any language. The languages that they offered were at the time Spanish, French, and German. That was it. But you had to take two years of it to graduate. So thank God I was exposed to that, because I found that I'm really good at learning new languages, and I absolutely loved it. I ended up, going to France on a high school trip, and then in college I lived in Avignon. It exposes you to different cultures, different ways of living, and that leads to so many other things. Empathy. But anyway, so how it led to my first job out of college is, I got a job at Transparent Language. So I call it my first frontier. And even though my name is Carrie Fischer, and yeah, I'm a Star Wars buff, I'm also a Star Trek fan. So Transparent Language created language learning software for people whose native language is English. And we went into, I think, FIGS, French, Italian, German, and Spanish, plus Japanese. So those 5 languages we started with. We got successful, and so we decided to kind of flip that and say, well, what about people who want to learn English in these countries? And so we flipped it so that English was the language to be learned, which meant we had to translate our user interface, our box, because back then we had diskettes, discs, floppy disks, the user guide. Everything had to be translated into these target languages. And so, when the time came to do that, I said, well, I'd love to do that. And that's how I fell into the localization industry. That's how a lot of us fell into it. It's not something that you kind of go for, although it is now. Hyperion was after that. Oracle's one of the largest software companies in the world. We had a team of 250 people in the worldwide languages translation group, WPTG. I can't believe I got that right. And then on to smaller company, bodybuilding.com. We sold supplements. I was brought on to translate our website into different languages, because the bodybuilding supplement market, for example, is huge in Brazil and other places, believe it or not, the UK. Not that I had to translate that, but had to make sure the content was appropriate and for those markets. And now I'm at Subway. I've been here for 7 years, and again, as part of the localization industry, I've been in it for 30 plus years, and I'll probably retire doing this. So in my mid-50s already. The localization ecosystem. I realize ecosystem is the most overused word in the world, next to community, right? Localization community, whatever you want to call this. It's where I work, and it's where me and all of my peers have enjoyed learning and working with each other. So I mentioned the buyer side, people like me, the service providers, language companies and individuals that I purchase language services from. But on the other side of it, you've got industry research firms. These are the companies, Common Sense Advisory, NIMSY, Slater. I actually subscribe to Common Sense Advisory. I pay a yearly fee to get reports on trends in localization. And as you can imagine, AI is in every report that every company does now. But it's a way to learn about different parts of the industry that I'm potentially not exposed to and yet have to deal with. Chatbots is a great example. Subway had started to talk about, we need to do chatbots. How do we localize it? Well, Common Sense Advisory did a whole piece on chatbots and how to do it and the best practices and different solutions. So they're a huge part of our industry as well. And gee, volunteer opportunities have become a huge part of our industry as well. Women in Localization is one of the nonprofits that I serve on the board, but there's things like Loc Lunch, where I think they're in 50, 60 cities where a bunch of industry related people, localization industry people, get together for lunch. It started in Madrid and it's now spread, across the entire world. So really a great networking opportunity as well. Gala is another, I don't believe they're a nonprofit, Globalization and Localization Association, but it's a way to volunteer. You can be on their board. And then, of course, Translators Without Borders. You can be a translator for them and help in countries that maybe have had a global disaster. Some different jobs available in the localization ecosystem. I'm going to ask Megan to put the link to the career paths in the language services slide here. It's actually a PDF, and there's no way that you can possibly read this. So I encourage you to look at the PDF, but it shows all the different jobs that are available in the buyer side, of the localization industry. And then on the right, I just put some of the jobs that came to mind as a language service buyer. You can be a project manager, an in-house linguist, an engineer, director, VP. There's a lot of jobs available that require language acquisition. If you go to the next slide. And there's also jobs that don't require it, that are in the localization industry. I'd like to say we're an inclusive environment. You don't have to know a language to be in our wonderful industry. But obviously for required, if you're going to be a linguist or an interpreter, a language quality assurance person, a language lead who creates glossaries, for the target languages, or a reviewer, obviously you have to be a native, you have to know those languages. But if you want to be just maybe a program manager or project manager, sales professionals, a lot of them don't know the languages. They're just selling the service. They're good salespeople. Vendor manager, maybe you're great at procurement, and you're great at negotiating deals or rates or whatever. There's a job for you in our industry. Or if you're an engineer and want to help out your company with, figuring out the internationalization pieces of your software, there's a job for you there. So I think that was it, right? Was that the end of my slides?
Yeah, it sure was. I see here we have a question for you, Carrie. Let me pull that up. Okay. Well, it's actually a comment. Someone who also studied in Avignon while at university.
Okay.
So, and I've visited Avignon. It's a beautiful place. I'm sure you enjoyed your experience there.
I did. And if I put, Le Pont d'Avignon behind me, no one would know what the heck it is. But everyone knows what the Eiffel Tower is, so that's what I put up behind me.
There's also another comment, Carrie, saying that you made, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Sherry Wilson smile, because they also studied French, Spanish, and Russian, and originally
Wow.
from Connecticut. So there's some connections in terms of you and some of the audience members.
It's funny, my dad is the one who said, so I grew up in the 80s, right? And Cold War and all that stuff. And I had the affinity for languages, and I was taking Spanish and French at the same time in high school and going into college. And he said, you might want to learn Russian. So he gave me this little workbook, to do over the summer between senior year and freshman year of college. And I actually got into it. So I was like, yeah, let's do this. And so 2 years of Russian after in college as well. That's how I got into Russian.
Let's see. Well, does anybody else have any questions? Love to answer them.
Can I ask a question while we're waiting?
Absolutely.
Sometimes
Please
it just
do.
takes the first one and then the rest of them start coming in. Carrie, I told you the other day, I'm super fascinated with everything, all of your experiences and speaking to the breadth of opportunity, because a lot of times in terms of the language space, there's just not an awareness of all of the possibility that you can do with language. And so I think that some of the resources that you shared are fantastic. You brought up something super interesting in terms of AI. And I'm curious in terms of your thoughts. Oh, and it feels like someone else is also in that AI train. So let's see if we can, Elizabeth asked, how is AI affecting the language interpreters and translators? And my question is pretty much along the same lines as Elizabeth. It's in terms of AI, its involvement, do you see any hits and peaks?
Hits and peaks? Absolutely. And in fact, I think the localization industry is one of the leaders in AI innovation, because AI has been around for a long time, especially in the localization industry. Neural machine translation, I remember when machine translation was, invented, whatever you want to call it. Everybody panicked. Oh my God, there goes my job. No. Machine translation is still evolving. Even the basic, rules based, or it's I do use it at Subway, but for technical documentation and the ops manual, and I don't leave it alone. I have to have a human look at what the machine has come up with. You can train a machine translation, and you can neural machine translation trains itself. But it's dare I say, it will never be at the quality, at least that I need it to be, for a guest-facing interface, whatever that might be. The app, we get really funny with our app, and we have things like let us entertain you, whatever, right? And lettuce is lettuce, 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 right? The vegetable. What is an MT, what is a machine translation going to come up with that? That's not going to make any sense. Boss it up with the next BOGO. No, I can't let a machine do anything with that. I can't even imagine what it would come up with. But so their human translations are always going to be needed. Can they be assisted by AI? Absolutely. However, what I've tested so far, at least for Subway's stuff, and again, it's the content for machine translated stuff, our technical documentation is boring as heck, right? But it works well with machine translation. But having AI in the loop, so I did a pilot with it's called automated post editing, or APE. Don't like the acronym. Anyway, where again, a trained AI LLM, large language model, does the editing, instead of the human. It was horrendous. So I did it for Polish. Granted, the LLMs are not as good as maybe English to Spanish. That was horrible. And then German, I also piloted German. It was 50-50. Half of it was human quality, the other half wasn't. I'm sorry, I can't risk that. I can't risk a non-professional translation. But I look forward to seeing what it can do in the future. And will linguists' jobs change? Yeah, they already have. And it's a continual evolving technology. And we continue to evolve with it. But it's kind of technology assisted, but humans are in charge. I don't even like human in the loop. I hate that term. So yeah, it absolutely affects AI. But honestly, I think, like I said, the local industry are the people that are kind of pushing it forward. We want to see what it can do. Can an LLM create an e-learning module with correctly trained terminology in French? Yeah, it's already being done. It can definitely do it in English. We're already doing that at Subway. We can create an e-learning module, for example, by referring to one of our technical documents and then making that prompt as smooth as possible. And then instead of spending 3 months creating an e-learning module, we're spending 6 weeks, because all we're doing is correcting, refining, making sure that the AI, understood what was being asked of it. That's all it's doing. It's spitting back information. It's not thinking. It's not, going, oh, you should really try this verb instead of that verb, whatever, right? But that's how AI is evolving in our industry.
Carrie, we've got another question for you here.
Okay.
How do you ensure minimum proficiency level of proficiency of multilingual employees? Do you implement industry recognized language assessments that certify language skills of multilingual employees?
Interesting. So we don't, first of all, in terms of localization, like I said, I outsource everything. I'm not going to ask a franchisee or somebody in the ops team in the Netherlands to translate something for me. They're sending me the stuff to translate into Dutch, right? Even though they might be able to do it. Nobody has the time. This is not their job, and they're not professional translators, right? So what I do is, I ensure that the people that I hire, the companies that I hire, have already done their due diligence on their linguists. And how I do the due diligence on the linguists I've got, quite frankly, is I give them, maybe it's simple, I give them a piece to translate that has already been translated by a professional, compare it, send it to a reviewer. Maybe, I do have many contacts in all of the offices that we have worldwide. Hey, what do you think of this translation? Understanding you're not a professional translator, but would this translation work for this content? Yes. That's how I got my Polish translator. To be honest, she is obviously a native speaker. She's in Poland. She just graduated with a master's in translation, English to Polish, English to Brazilian Portuguese. And I asked her to translate something in Polish, brought it in, sent it to Joanna in our Poland office, and she said, "This is flawless. This is perfect." Great. Got a new Polish translator. I mean, do I have these proficiency tests? No, I don't. The language companies do. They have a very rigorous testing system and all that. So I rely on them to find the linguists that are going to work for Subway's content.
Another question for you. Would you mind providing us the source of this wonderful document, Career Paths in Language Services? It's a great resource. Thank you. We can provide it in the email follow-up to all of the registrants and attendees. I think that makes the most sense. And you'll be receiving that email tomorrow. And a comment, Carrie, so good to hear you again. Your passion and clarity of expression are wonderful assets for the industry. All the best from America the Bilingual.
Thank you, Steve.
All right.
Now, there's a couple more questions in the chat as well. I don't know if you've had a chance.
I can put my glasses on and read them.
Oh, I can read it to you.
Oh, okay.
And both, we can yes and this. What would you say to middle schoolers related to learn languages, since you have the multi-language experience? Thanks.
Gosh, the earlier the better. The earlier the better. It's really, unfortunately, in this country right now, like I said, when I was a kid, language was required to graduate high school. That's no longer the case in most states. I remember my 17-year-old son, starting high school, and I was like, okay, which language are you going to choose? And he said, well, I don't have to choose a language. I've got language, and then I've got humanities, and then I've got arts and photography. I can do all these things that would, satisfy the requirement. I was like, so that was really surprising to me. And that's why I joined the Language Connects Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of ACTFL. Because I think the public school system has lost that requirement. And some of my friends in high school were able to take a language in junior high and middle school, excuse me. And I'm from the Midwest. Everything was a junior high. And there were language programs in elementary school too. I mean, that's when you really want to, try and expose children to different languages because they're such sponges. But yeah, if the question is, do I want language in middle school? And yeah, the earlier the better. And again, that's part of the Language Connects Foundation. Their vision, their mission, right, is to support the teachers that we've got in these global language departments. And also, my goal is to eventually influence government to bring language back into the public school system.
Yes, yes, I love to hear it. And Carrie, I think that conversations like this and your resource about different jobs that are opened up to you by having that multilingual experience are also part of the resources that we can support our teachers and our students in understanding that there aren't just 2 or 3 paths for multilingual learners or multilingual students or multilingual adults or professionals.
Totally. Yeah.
That they're not locked into being a translator, a teacher. They can be a translator, a teacher, and you gave mountains of directions that individuals can get. So I think that recognizing that language ability can be in the educational space, the creative space, the technological space, and all of the different spaces starts to open up that conversation so that you don't know what you don't know. So hopefully those students are more excited because they see that language piece align with other interests.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's I think another question about what type of training would you like to have the new employees related to AI tools? That one's great.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take it from the Subway side of things. And it's up to me as the globalization person for Subway to ensure I'm informed, right, on anything AI related and make it available, not to anybody, but, to make sure I'm using the latest technology, the latest strategies that benefit Subway. Having said that, Subway uses AI, and we have training sessions on, we're a Microsoft house, and so we use Copilot, which is our AI helper. We now, embrace it, but to be honest, it was me asking HR, hey, can we use ChatGPT? There's a lot of great uses for it, and I don't know what Subway's policy is on AI. And it took them a while to answer, and we kind of figured out, what, we should be doing this. We should be getting on this bandwagon. And so people are trained on Copilot, how to use it. It's great for minutes. I mean, if you've missed a meeting, you can ask Copilot, if it was recorded, to send you a summary of that meeting. You're not waiting for somebody to type something up and then send it to you. Copilot, we found, works really well with the right prompt, creating job descriptions for HR. HR loves it. Creating content, like I said, the eLearning person that I talked to said she created an eLearning module, giving it a good prompt and having it reference, a user manual. And then it's, again, instead of 3 months, her work was boiled down to 6 weeks. So AI definitely has its place in Subway. We use it every day. And we are trained on it. And, you know, there's always this thing about safe AI and all this stuff. Because we're a Microsoft house, we have to trust what Microsoft gives us, but it is a closed system. So we don't have to worry about our stuff going out, you know, to the rest of the world, because our stuff is private. We don't want our, you know, ingredients and our sandwich bills or, you know, any of that to be set free. I hope that answers the question.
I think I love that you're positioning AI in such a useful way, like you're using it as a resource, and at the same time, you're recognizing that there are certain limitations and that we need to be trained. And right now, some of the examples that you gave are fantastic, and it seems like we have some teachers in the audience as well. And I know that Center for Applied Linguistics has done a series of, you know, kind of diving into language and technology and how do we use it with our students in a meaningful way, because resisting this technological advancement is not the way to go. And, you know, being scared of it is not the way to go. We need to figure out a way to use it as a resource and also understand its limitations so that we can position ourselves as users of this and then be able to co-create with the technology, right?
Totally. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we have one more comment here. And after that, we should probably move on for the sake of time. But the comment is, you are correct about little kids being sponges. I teach elementary grades 1 through 5 Spanish, and the first graders love it and learn so much. They're so willing to try and love the puppet songs, games. Their pronunciation is awesome.
I know. They don't have any fear like we do. You know, I'll be completely honest. I speak better when I have a glass of wine, right? Because I'm relaxed. I'm not so worried about my accent. Kids don't care, and their accent, I completely agree. Their accent is so good, flawless.
Right.
Thank you
great.
very much.
Well, thank you, Carrie. That was wonderful. Really appreciate it once again. And now I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Xiomara Rivera Pagan as our next speaker. Xiomara has already participated in the Q&A, so you have a bit of an introduction to her. But welcome, Xiomara.
Thank you, Ned. I'm really excited. I think that Carrie's piece kind of lends itself really nicely to everything that we've been talking about. If we still have questions for Carrie and or for the greater conversation, feel free to continue throwing in the Q&A and in the chat. I saw that there was someone that was raising their virtual hand. So if we didn't get a chance to get to you, don't worry, we'll still have a Q&A piece at the end of this where we can integrate this part of the conversation as well as anything that connects back to Carrie. So at the end of the day, as decision makers, as leaders, as citizens, we have to figure out how all of this conversation about multilingualism connects to our pockets, because again, that's one of those decision points. And so we start to consider first, does multilingualism confer economic benefits? And we see for sure it does. Multilingualism and export success. So research by Professor James Foreman Peck on behalf of the UK's Department of Business, Innovation and Skills identified that significant economic impact stemming from inadequate language proficiency essentially cost you money. And so costs in UK economy approximately 48 billion pounds annually, equivalent to 3.5% of GDP. So at the end of the day, if we are not making decisions effectively, efficiently, and it is because of a lack of resources due to not having those resources be multilingual, this will affect small and medium-sized businesses, especially because they need all of the budget in order to advance their mission. So if they do not have those resources to employ language specialists in-house, then it's going to be something that they're going to have to consider outside of the house or outside of their ecosystem, like Carrie mentioned. And a lack of world language skills discourages non-exporters from engaging in international trade ventures, which is a missed opportunity. multilingualism and export success. So a study conducted among small and medium-sized enterprises in Sweden, Germany, Denmark, and France. Companies allocating greater resources to language acquisition were able to export more goods, which makes more sense the more that you can get out. There's a whole world that you can connect with if you have the language to do so. And not only the language to do so, but as Carrie mentioned, it needs to be quality translations. And when you are thinking of, for example, she mentioned in the UK that they had done some work and there wasn't necessarily translation work, but there's still localization efforts that need to take place, because just because someone speaks the same language doesn't mean that their variety of that language is going to be in line with cultural expectations or their understanding of certain words or phrases. So German enterprises heavily investing in multilingual personnel expanded their market reach by 10 additional export countries. Language skills, localization, and business success. Research performed by California State University of Chico, 65% of multinational enterprises view localization as important or very important for driving increased company revenues. Nearly half of the respondents acknowledged instances where misunderstandings impeded significant cross-border transactions, resulting in substantial losses. These findings underscore need for heightened investment in language and communication training, as well as more rigorous recruitment and selection processes. So we already know how challenging it can be to communicate with another that speaks the same language and might even have the same background as you, because at the end of the day, there's a lot that goes into communication. It's not only the language, it's the tone, it's the experiences, it's the emotion. There's so much that goes into communication. And the more diversity that you put in between the speaker and the listener, the more challenging it can get internally as well as externally, right? Because a lot of this work, we're not only thinking of how we're communicating in order to expand our markets, but also how are we communicating in-house. So the need for an investment in terms of language and communication training helps us in-house, because we start to think in that meta-linguistic fashion about how language is learned or how we are thinking about language. That helps us to be better communicators. That helps us to be better communicators with someone who speaks our language. And like Carrie mentioned, be empathetic in situations where, whether or not you're speaking the same language, you understand that communication is challenging. And so that makes for a smoother process and a lot more opportunity in terms of business success. Survey conducted by CSA Research in 2019, which included 8,709 consumers from 29 different countries, determined that 76% of respondents favored products that provided information in their dominant language. It's imperative for businesses to prioritize clear and effective communication with prospective clients, customers, and partners. This involves translating product labels, promotional materials, and customer support information. So we know how we feel when we are in a setting. If you've ever traveled, or if you've ever been in a situation where you're trying to communicate and you're having a difficult time, and then all of a sudden you feel heard, you feel seen, you feel that someone is using the language that you feel most comfortable with. It brings your guard down, and it allows you to take risks in terms of either experiences, if you're selling a service, or products. So the more that you can create spaces and opportunities for your business to provide the home language, dominant language, or a language that someone can connect with, the more it is easier to not only clearly communicate your mission and objective, but also make them feel seen, feel heard, feel valued, and therefore be able to take risks in terms of trying out new things like a product or a service or an experience. Nearly a third of businesses suffer from customer attrition as a result of inadequate multilingual assistance. So thinking about customer service and how multilingualism is integrated into that experience. 71% affirm heightened allegiance to companies that provide support in their mother tongue. 40% of consumers worldwide indicated their reluctance to engage with enterprises that fail to offer support in their native language. So similar to what we were just mentioning, when you are having difficulty, when you are challenged with an experience, when you're not understanding how to use a service, or you're having, you just have a question about the product, and it's as simple as communicating with customer service to either have your question answered or to walk you through that process, not having the resources in terms of customer service in order to be able to solve those problems in the target language, it is a huge hit to the economics of a business. And so we want to be mindful that especially in certain spaces, if you have to prioritize, you want to be very mindful that an individual's emotions might be heightened when they are frustrated or they have questions. And so it's really important, especially in certain places, to make sure that we are making it easeful for individuals or customers to problem solve so that we maintain them in our space and our ecosystem. And that way you don't suffer from that attrition. So there's obviously a lot of resources that we have spoken to and that we see, especially speaking to the benefits of multilingualism, learning young, and we even spoke to a lot of that today. And we want to make sure that it's acknowledged that multilingualism supports cognitive benefits even at an adult age, even older in age or in your adulthood. And so it enhances creativity and innovation. So recent investigations by First and Grin have substantiated the correlation between multilingualism and creativity. Parallel studies have unveiled a robust positive association between creativity, innovation, nurturing multilingual abilities could potentially catalyze greater innovation within organizations. So that you can think about this through the lens of how are you bringing in a workforce that is multilingualism, and you can also think about this through the lens of with the workforce that you have, how are you supporting them in gaining multilingual abilities so that you can still capitalize on enhancing that creativity and innovation within your workspace. Improving decision-making. Research conducted by Bose Kesar at the University of Chicago using a second language may prompt individuals to make more pragmatic decisions in moral and ethical quandaries. We've already talked about that empathy piece. So it implies a move towards more impartial and rational decision-making, potentially minimizing emotional biases. Leaders and their teams can tackle challenges with increased analytical rigor, reducing biases as well. Influence of language training on workplace dynamics. Now, this is really key because, like we were saying before, communication is something that we hopefully are all constantly trying to improve in order to be better communicators and be more productive and effective at our jobs. And either knowing or working in a multilingual workspace contributes to that. So a survey of thousands of language learners sheds light on immense benefits from investing in employee language proficiency. So more confident in business operations. 70% surveyed said language training made them more confident when working with teams, partners, and vendors. And something key about this is that often we don't think about the specific type of language that we might need for our roles. And so when we're thinking about language training, we might think about our more social language skills. And it's really important for us to keep in mind that there's a specific type of language, an industry-specific language, or an academic type language, that it's always helpful to review and to do so in community with your workers. And so any sort of language learning opportunity contributes to that. stimulates employee engagement. 63% of respondents expressed that access to language training made them feel more engaged in their work. And this is, we've had organizations that we've worked with that have looked at it through the lens of, okay, we want to support our team members in acquiring the language so that they can be better communicators with either team members that are in a global aspect, maybe part of their team is located in Brazil, and then part of their team is located in California. So that will support them, but also thinking about just learning something new within your workforce or your team gives you an opportunity to socialize and connect and bond over learning experiences that are outside of the workforce. And so it's no surprise that more than half of the respondents are feeling more engaged just by learning another language. It increases productivity. 64% of language learners say that language training made them more productive when working with teams, partners, and vendors. The relationships that you're creating, whether or not it is bonding you off of something that's completely unrelated to your work or completely related to your work and then makes you feel more confident and efficient, then contributes to that confidence and efficiency within your team. And so it makes you more productive. And again, always expanding your linguistic repertoire is going to always help you be a better communicator internally as well as externally. And there's a shortage of multilingual workers. And so we've talked about a couple of different ways that we can go about this, but first identifying at World Language Skills, there is a gap survey conducted by Ipsos Public Affairs for the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACFO. 90% of US employers report a reliance on employees with language skills other than English. 34% of employers relying on world languages report a world language skills gap, and 85% of employers state a reliance on Spanish. However, 42% of employers report a shortage in Spanish skills. So we see that not only is there a need, but there's not necessarily the workforce that is able to provide this. And what we mentioned before, we can be thinking as either leaders or as part of the team, as we are building our team, how are we being mindful of incorporating those expectations of language ability in order to increase the team's capacity? But also, you have a team that is currently working with you. And so you want to be mindful of the fact that you can build their linguistic repertoire and make them feel more confident. It's not always about looking outside of the team. You can build in-house skills. Impact on exporters. Exporters are almost 60% more likely to experience a deficiency in these skills compared to non-exporters, and exporters are more than twice as likely to lose business opportunities due to insufficient language capacity. Consequences of the skills shortage. Nearly 1 in 4 employees have lost or been able to pursue business opportunities due to a lack of world language skills among their workforce. And I also want to mention, as we were thinking about the workforce that you potentially have in-house that has that language ability, many of those workers might feel strange, because as we are thinking about when we're going to those multilingual workers, we need to be mindful of our expectations of them and not outsource all resources that rely on language ability to those workers. Like Carrie was saying, even if those individuals are multilingual, and as she was saying, most likely they are, especially outside of the United States, many countries, many workers are multilingual. And we need to be mindful of what our expectations are and who's actually trained for these roles. Because to do it at the quality, like Carrie was mentioning, we need to build the repertoire, the skills in those translators, and also have those resources to be mindful to localize in a quality way, in a thoughtful way, in a meaningful way that isn't just checking off the box. So in conclusion, we started with the question of, is multilingualism a workplace superpower? And we hope that we've given enough evidence through Carrie's conversation, as well as the data that we've presented, that multilingual is in fact a workplace superpower. It facilitates advancement in international careers. It is critical to economic performance. It enhances workplace contribution through cognitive benefits. Learning languages impacts workplace dynamics positively, and it helps meet strong demand for multilingual employees.
Great, thank you, Xiomara. Is there anyone who has a question to ask Xiomara? Looking through the question box here. And no questions yet. Don't be shy. Xiomara would love to field your questions.
I do love to answer questions. And if you have any questions for Carrie as well, we want to make sure that there's a little bit of time. I think we have a couple more minutes that we get to squeeze those in. Jen Carson, thank you. Fantastic presentation.
Well, no questions seem to be coming in here.
Really quick, I think that Carrie made a mention about advocating for languages locally as well as nationally, and doing so through the government and through policy. And Jen Carson mentioned that you can advocate for language study through JNCL Nicholas, and it's actually in the chat. They do a lot of great work in terms of advocating for language policy at local and national level. So just wanted to give that a quick plug.
Great. All right. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to the conclusion here. Here are the sources from the data that we presented to you. And before we conclude, I'd like to provide some information on how you can follow up with us with any questions or to learn more. To do so, contact Harry Higginbotham, Sales Director, at his email address, hhigginbotham@cricketmedia.com. Again, that's Harry Higginbotham, hhigginbotham@cricketmedia.com. Of course, you'll be receiving a copy of this broadcast, so you'll have Harry's email address if you need it. So this concludes today's webinar. Thank you for joining Cricket eLearning's discussion, Multilingualism Workplace Superpower. We appreciate you attending and hope you've gained insight to reinforce your own opinion about whether multilingualism is in fact a workplace superpower. We hope to see you at our next webinar. Again, thanks very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.